Welcome to our panel on a virtually facilitated investigation of ostensible RSPK disturbances during the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm Loyd Auerbach, and I'd like to first introduce our panelists for today. Dr. Gerald Solfvin is a longtime PA member with primary interest in healing, meditation, and appropriate methods for spontaneous case research. He's an adjunct associate professor with the Center for Indic Studies at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, and the Institute of Advanced Sciences, also in Dartmouth. Bryan Williams is the research director of the Psychical Research Foundation and was a research student of the late William G. Rowe. He was a recipient of the Parapsychology Foundation's Eileen J. Garrett Scholarship Award in 2008. Dr. Beth Hedva is the Director of Training and Counseling at the Canadian Institute for Transpersonal and Integrative Sciences in Calgary, Canada, working internationally and integrating traditional cultural healing practices into clinical parapsychology. Beth Hedva is a registered psychologist and healer who began having precognitive psychic dreams and contact with departed loved ones by age 12. And I'm Loyd Auerbach, Director of the Office of Paranormal Investigations. I have been conducting field investigations since 1979. I am an adjunct professor at National University, which is formerly JFK University, also at Atlantic University. I am one of the instructors for the Rhine Education Center parapsychology courses. I am the president of the Forever Family Foundation, and I'm very happy to be here, although obviously we're virtually here. So I think it's actually very apropos that we're talking about a virtual investigation and case at a virtual conference. This case actually started with me in June of 2020. Now, of course, the lockdown happened in March of 2020. Started really focused here in the Bay Area in mid-March 2020. I got an email and then a phone call from a local ghost hunter in mid-June of 2020, someone who I had met at a few conferences. And she had gotten a call from actually a friend of hers who she had met at conferences as well, who had a friend, so this is kind of like down the chain, who had been having some unusual experiences. Their family had been having unusual, extensive, unexplained physical activity in their home beyond their own experience. Now, what's interesting is that the referral came to me because the local ghost hunter organization felt ill-equipped and not educated enough to handle this type of case. This is a family of 4 in Silicon Valley, including a stay-at-home mom, Silicon Valley engineer father, so very, very grounded in the sciences and engineering, 2 teens, a 16-year-old boy and a 14-year-old girl. In mid-June, they had 4 days of intense, fully unexplained physical activity happening, which led to a call to the police department who could not do anything. And then through Robert, the father's acquaintance, his friend, they got to this local ghost hunter who got to me. So shortly after the contact, I was able to make an arrangement for a Zoom call. This was not obviously possible for me to go and visit the house, the location at all. And given the circumstances of the pandemic for so long, that's why we ended up with this virtual investigation, this virtual case. My call was on June 24th of 2020, and it was focused on a deep interview. So what was going on, during which I also found out that they felt that as they look back on the activity, that they had had some activity, not intense, but some activity as far back as March of 2020, shortly after the lockdown. My intent with that initial call was the interview, was then informational therapy, if you want to call it therapy. I sent them a lot of information on PK, on Psi in general, and some exercises, specific information on RSPK, and additional resources. Had a number of subsequent phone calls, mainly with Eileen, the mother. And I learned that the daughter, the 14-year-old, who was seemingly at the center of all this, didn't want to even acknowledge that any of this was going on. I contacted Jerry Solfvin in mid-July. I had been speaking with Jerry and Bryan Williams about what Jerry will be discussing with us in a moment, and brought Jerry in on the case, who brought in Bryan as well. And then as we worked through a number of additional calls and a Zoom call that Jerry and I had with the family, we determined we really needed to bring in someone on the therapeutic side, at which point we brought in Beth Hedva. So I'm going to turn it over to Jerry now, who's going to talk a little bit about his perspective. And then we will actually come back after Bryan and Beth Hedva speak. I will come back with just a few endpoint notes.
A virtually facilitated investigation of ostensible RSPK disturbances during the COVID-19 pandemic by Loyd Auerbach, Beth Hedva, Gerald Solfvin, and Bryan Williams. Hi, my name is Jerry Solfvin, and I will open this panel with a brief introduction to the echo concept and perspective. My personal re-immersion into the investigation of spontaneous cases of the RSPK type is due primarily to one thing. A precious hidden jewel for science awaits discovery therein. At its core is a cluster of unpredictable, complex, chaotic, and possibly self-organizing anomalous phenomena. Exhuming this jewel is a methodological issue, and this may require collection of raw, unbiased, theory-free data on pure phenomena, compiling a large database of cases with standardized variables, several investigators with different perspectives working in partnership. A methodological approach is suggested by the curiosity that many cases, the best cases from a scientific standpoint, are distinctly paradoxical, displaying two equally interesting but quite different kinds of phenomena. One is the unpredictable bursts of complex, chaotic, kinetic anomaly. And two is the psychosocial group context, displaying remarkably consistent patterns of group tensions and group patterns across cases, history, and culture. This paradoxical pairing may be a key to identifying a subtype of RSPK cases which offers benefits for science. For one thing, the fact of the paradoxical pairing facilitates case identification for compiling a pure database which can later be queried. I call this special type of case AECKO, pronounced echo. Echo is not a theory, not an operational definition of psi or anomalous experience. ECHO is an acronym for a set of necessary and sufficient features of this special type of case. The letters stand for anomalous, episodic, communal, kinetic occurrence. These are defined as follows. A and O at the beginning and end of the acronym is for anomalous occurrence, a cluster of related anomalous events. K is for kinetic, reminding us that there is an energetic, potentially measurable aspect which leaves evidence that something actually happened. E is for episodic, referring to both aspects of the paradox. The cluster of anomalies plays out a relatively short story or episode or narrative in days and weeks, usually, with distinct beginning and a middle and an end. Two, the group psychosocial context also plays out a narrative or a story, often a complex and hidden one, and often portraying a major transition in the group structure, which we might call a transitional narrative. C is for communal, which captures the systems theoretic aspect of the case that refers to the group of people who are at once the reporters, the witnesses, and the targets of the burst of anomalies, as well as being the cast of characters which plays out the tense, often disharmonious psychosocial drama from which the anomalies emerge. ECHO is an acronym for a minimal set of necessary and sufficient features for identifying a special type of paradoxical case study. The implications of ECHO are many. First, ECHO is a special type of subtype of case identifiable by phenomenal features. Echo replaces horribly unscientific terminology often used as a descriptor. Echo reduces unnecessary confusion regarding case types. Echo is theory-free. Echo identifies two aspects requiring investigation. Echo has potentially serious health risks associated with it. Echo makes case for urgent importance of doing careful investigation by professional people, preferably licensed professional people. Echo suggests that diagnosis and treatment may be required. Echo makes a powerful case for the use of clinical and development of clinical parapsychology. Echo negates the myth that the investigator should delay cessation of the phenomena in favor of the investigation. And finally, Echo facilitates alternative approaches and thinking on consciousness studies. Look for more information about Echo in Mindfield Bulletin in the fall of 2021.
This portion of the panel is intended to offer a brief summary of the observational data that were collected over the course of the Silicon Valley case. Various kinds of ostensible poltergeist disturbances were reported by the family from June 17, 2020 to February 4, 2021. These included spontaneous object movements, percussive sounds such as knocks, bangs, and scrapings, tactile sensations such as pokes, skin brushes, and dermal scratches, and the appearance of ostensibly materialized liquids such as water, soap, antibacterial gel, food coloring, and ink. Throughout the course of the disturbances, effort was made by Eileen and Beth Hedva to diligently chronicle them in a written observational log of events, which recorded the date and approximate time of the disturbances, the witnesses that were present at the time, and the relative circumstances under which they occurred. A total of 295 events were recorded over the full 7.5-month active duration of the case. Two types of analyses were performed on these observational log data. The first was a temporal course analysis, in which all 295 individual events recorded in the log were tallied as a function of time, measured in units of days. The second was a categorical clustering analysis, in which the events were subdivided and clustered into categories, in order to examine for any subtle symbolic themes that might possibly be reflected in the disturbances. As indicated by the regression line seen in this graph, the temporal course analysis tended to reveal a significant declining trend in the number of daily reported disturbances over time. This means that fewer disturbances tended to be reported as time passed. It is also worth noting that visibly, the declining trend seems to correlate well with the series of telehealth sessions that Beth Hedva had conducted with the family, which began on September 14, 2020. There were several features identified in the categorical clustering data which seem to be consistent with those found in other poltergeist cases. For the sake of time, only a few of them will be highlighted here. One of these features was object focusing, involving instances of the same object or type of object being moved or affected multiple times. As will be seen in the next slide, the most commonly affected object in this case was cellular phones, a device that has recently taken on some degree of personal meaning for a lot of people in our present technology-driven culture. Instances of cellular phones being affected has been found in one other case so far. This was a recent one from 2016 involving an electronic poltergeist. If we look more broadly in terms of large-scale surveys of cases, we find that object focusing tends to be a fairly frequent feature of poltergeist cases, being found in 76.7% of the cases surveyed by Roll in 1977. Here is a more detailed breakdown of the instances of object focusing that were suggestively found in the data. Another feature is tactile sensations, in which one or more of the family members reported feeling physical sensations of being touched. There were 26 instances of this reported in this case, which are listed here. Most of the sensations were reported by Emma, but also occasionally by Nathan and Eileen. Emma also reported 2 instances of being scratched on her body, accompanied by the appearance of red dermal marks. Similar reports of this have been found in 2 poltergeist cases, 2 combined poltergeist haunt cases, as well as in other historical cases. Tactile sensations have been reported in a small fraction of poltergeist cases, having been found in only 4% of Roll survey, and in 15% in the large 500-case survey conducted by Gerald and Cornell in 1979. Another feature is the spontaneous materialization of water, in which one or more family members told of being splashed by ostensibly materialized water. There were 4 instances of this. This feature has been described in at least 7 other poltergeist cases, listed here. On a broader scale, this feature is found in a very small minority of cases, just 2% in Roll's 1977 survey, and 5% in the Gerald and Cornell survey from 1979. One other feature that will be mentioned here is a possible symbolic theme relating to cleansing and hygiene. There were 47 instances reported in which the affected objects were those which can be seen as having a common purpose in relation to cleaning, disinfecting, grooming, and/or personal hygiene. Some of them are listed here. To some extent, this theme could perhaps be seen as symbolically reflecting 2 aspects of the family's psychological situation. First, the poltergeist outbreak occurred during the COVID-19 pandemic, a time when issues of adequate cleansing and disinfection were of utmost concern for human health, and were thus frequently on the minds of many people, including the family. Second, the teenage years tend to be a time when children become quite developmentally self-conscious and focusing a lot of attention upon their body image. And this may have been of some meaningful importance to the 2 teenage members of the household, particularly Emma. This might be suggested by the fact that of the 47 affected objects, about a quarter of them belonged to Emma. In reporting these results, it is important to point out the main limitation that comes with them. Due to the restrictions imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic, it was not possible for us to make a direct on-site observation of the disturbances while they were still in progress. This limits the degree of certainty that we can have about whether and to what degree they might have been genuinely anomalous. However, as pointed out previously, the patterns and features that we noted in the data do seem to be consistent with those found in other well-documented poltergeist cases. On this basis, perhaps there is some reason for thinking that at least some of the reported phenomena in this case might have been genuine. That remains to be one of the topics for discussion in the present panel. Thank you so much for your attention.
I'm Dr. Beth Hedva from the Canadian Institute for Transpersonal and Integrative Sciences, and I'm going to discuss with you RSPK defensive reactions during the COVID-19 lockdown as a case for clinical parapsychology. It began when 6 police showed up when a family of 4 in Silicon Valley, California, had a paranormal encounter. The police were responding to the family's experience of recurrent spontaneous psychokinetic events, also known as RSPK. It began about 6 weeks after the COVID-19 lockdown in California. And what I'm going to present here is a demonstration of how a properly coordinated intervention using video conferencing was successful in dealing with these issues because they were done by a team of well-trained professionals. And we need more trained professionals empowered to confidently do this kind of work. So I am now going to share my screen and get my PowerPoint up. And so we can begin now to look at opening the door to clinical parapsychology by examining the strategies and standards for formal clinical parapsychological practices, also the appropriate client considerations and ethical protocols based on the Universal Declaration of Ethical Principles for Psychologists, already formalized internationally in psychology and medicine. These standards were used by the Canadian Institute for Transpersonal and Integrative Sciences in 2013 when a government social service agency sought out formal clinical parapsychology services from our professional team. So let's explore what triggered the RSPK defensive reactions in the Silicon Valley family. We do know from the research in psychology that the impact of COVID-19 sheltering in place, social isolation and disruption to family and daily work routines heightens irritability, anger and frustration, confusion and worry, existential uncertainty, loneliness, denial, and despair for children, teens, and adults. RSPK defensive reactions are often associated with the unconscious, unexpressed, usually conflictual emotional energy of a living person, not a ghost, who is activating the apparent otherworldly RSPK events. Parapsychologists call this individual a poltergeist agent. And though a poltergeist agent can be any age, adolescence is a particularly vulnerable time. Sheltering in place likely gave rise to anomalous, episodic, communal, kinetic occurrences, also known as ECHO, AECKO, in which the tensions from isolation and disruption to routines combined with the existential uncertainties of the pandemic to impact the collective energy of the family. To deal with this, a team was formed to perform, starting with 2 independent investigations to explore the presence of RSPK. First, Loyd Auerbach of the Office of Paranormal Investigation did his evaluation in June, and Dr. Gerald Solfvin, professor at the University of Massachusetts, did his evaluation in July. I was brought in on August 4th and did a 3rd evaluation and assessment, as well as providing clinical parapsychological treatment from here in Calgary, Canada. And Bryan Williams, Director of Research at the Psychical Research Foundation in New Mexico, analyzed and reviewed all of the data and came to the conclusion that there was evidence of ostensible RSPK in the Silicon Valley family situation. The client is a 1-income middle-class family living in Silicon Valley. I'm using pseudonyms to support the anonymity of my clients. Robert, the father, was a 56-year-old engineer working in Silicon Valley, and his wife, Eileen, 50-year-old stay-at-home mom, together with their 2 teenage children, Nathan, age 16, and Emma, age 14, along with a pet foster rabbit, all living together 24/7 in a very small 3-bedroom townhome. About 6 weeks after the mandatory statewide stay-at-home order was issued on March 19th, 2020, this Silicon Valley, California family reported experiencing relentless, spontaneous RSPK events. All family members witnessed and experienced rappings and tappings, sensations of being touched and poked and scratched, objects flying through the air, sometimes hitting a family member, food and objects disappearing and appearing and sometimes materializing, as well as electronic equipment turning on and off spontaneously. I performed a clinical assessment on August 4th, which included a parapsychological narrative questionnaire and a clinical assessment. I should mention, the children chose not to come and only parents attended this assessment. I offered education to the parents about RSPK, trained them in breathwork and stress reduction strategies, and together in a collaborative fashion, we developed crisis intervention strategies in the event of future RSPK situations. And I specified homework, including monitoring the RSPK in order to integrate the information from our session. Ongoing treatment interventions built upon this starting September 14th, including training the parents and Nathan, who joined us in family therapy. Emma refused treatment. Emma was the likely poltergeist agent who was asserting autonomy and independence, which is common for teenagers. In training of the embodied awareness, people were trained to scan energy in their bodies, develop whole body deep listening, paying attention to thoughts, sensations, and emotions, and expanding their sensory perception into potential extrasensory perception, identifying gut feelings, recognizing emotions as potential telepathic transmissions between family members, and being able to name family members' unspoken needs as well as express their own unspoken needs, and of course, verifying these hunches. This was combined with more conventional interventions such as building communication skills, listening and speaking, and sharing praises, as well as creating room for sharing gripes, and also with the couple, the marital couple, giving them intimacy enhancement exercises. I also trained the parents about teenage psychosocial developmental tasks and the need for autonomy and independence. And we also addressed PTSD with EMDR, bilateral stimulation, and stress reduction techniques. I suggested they continue to monitor the RSPK as a method to cultivate mindful awareness. And when we did engage in family therapy with Nathan, Rob, and Eileen, Nathan would join us for between 10 and 20 minutes in a session. We also began to explore the conflicts, particularly the cultural and transpersonal issues were an area of conflict around religious and spiritual practices, particularly between Emma and Nathan and Emma and her parents. There were 3 different religious practices under one roof in this family. So parents were trained to coach their children in good communication skills and also to be able to use conflict resolution and win-win negotiation skills. Changes in RSPK. During the investigative evaluations in June, there were 74 RSPK events, and in July, the total was 78 RSPK events. Clinical parapsychology interventions on April 4th, there were already 21 RSPK events in the first 4 days. After the clinical assessment and treatment, I heard from Eileen on August 19th that there had been a reduction to RSPKs down to 8 over that 2-week period. On August 22nd, unfortunately, another disaster was declared by the governor when the California wildfires began to spread across the state, continuing to spreading all the way through October. I reached out to Eileen, and on August 23rd, she wrote back to me saying, "We do not have to evacuate, but the air quality is very poor. We have been inside our homes for days without being able to open the windows." It's not a surprise that the RSPK events in the last few days of August, from August 26th to August 30th, increased to 44 events, bringing the total in August up to 73 RSPK events. Regular treatment began on September 14th, and the RSPKs immediately began to decline to 27 in the month of September, with a steady decline through December, and a bump up of RSPKs starting on January 6th, which you might remember coincided with the insurrection and storming of the Capitol, which Eileen described also as the perfect storm for their RSPK, joining together with the stresses of high COVID cases and deaths in the state of California and only 7% ICU beds in the Bay Area. And then, of course, internal family stressors. The children were very stressed about their grades, beginning to increase in conflicts around religious differences and spiritual traditions. And the father began to get very frustrated and aggravated with the constant arguing, which created what Eileen called a perfect storm that she believed increasing the RSPKs. Interestingly, Nathan's room was targeted at the peak with 14 RSPK events damaging his property. And likewise, on February 3rd, 15 RSPK events damaging the property in the master bedroom. It was after that last catastrophe that Emma had a vision with the letters D-O-N-E. And she went to her parents and family members and said, the RSPK is done. You don't need to go to therapy anymore. And of course, the family members were a little more cautious and went for an entire month without RSPK from February 4th to March 9th, when they decided that it was time to then terminate the therapy, since their goal for therapy was the elimination of RSPK events in their family. So what can we learn from all of this in conclusion? One of the things that we need to remember, and I'm just looking for my concluding remarks here, forgive me for a second. Basically, first and foremost, clinical parapsychology is a practice, not just a research study. It is a practice first and foremost. And in this process of professional clinical parapsychology, with increasing numbers of people reporting psychic phenomena, and let me just move this out of the way, exceptional experiences and anomalous side disturbances, it requires professional parapsychological research and practice. Investigating the phenomena is only a small part of clinical practice, and there is an obvious need to build upon the practice of clinical parapsychology, and it should be a major professional division within the Parapsychological Association. Another thing we've learned, particularly from this case, is remote communication technologies can provide an effective venue for the collaborative efforts of researchers, investigators, clinical parapsychologists, and healers and psychics worldwide in order to address the needs of clients who are dealing with these kinds of side disturbances. I want to thank you for your attention. And if you are interested in exploring these kinds of situations more, I'd like to refer you to a few references, and do feel free to contact me at drbeth@hedva.com. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Jerry, Bryan, and Beth Hedva. So I'm just going to close talking a little bit about the follow-up. I was able to visit the family for the first time in person, live in 3D, on July 10th. So this was a week ago from when I'm actually recording this now. Robert, as an engineer, he expressed being especially disturbed by the activity because he could not understand how it could be happening. Not that it was happening, because it was, but how it could be happening. He stated that what he was experiencing, even now, even after, well after the therapy, was like PTSD. And I've seen that actually in other cases that I've been involved in over the years. As Jerry and I learned in speaking with them, and with him specifically, the more we can provide to him in the way of papers and research looking at the potential physics of psi, the more he feels comfortable. However, he really doesn't like talking about the activity at all. He's willing to us, but he's generally not interested in delving into the experiences anymore. Eileen, on the other hand, has expressed real interest, serious interest in learning more about PK, about psi in general, and our research. She's indicated she's feeling the impact of it all still, but her openness on the subject indicates she's going to be the first in the family to come to terms with what happened. I'll be in occasional communication with them going forward to see what lasting impact this has had on them and to answer any further questions that Eileen will have, because I know she will have more. But one of the things we have to consider is the impact Emma's avoidance of any and all recognition of the activity, her possible relationship. What that impact is remains to be seen. Personally, I'm just hoping there is no additional surge of COVID cases here in the Bay Area that could lead to another lockdown, both for the family and of course for all of us. And that goes across the country for that matter. Even as we're seeing surges in a few places in the US right now, the Bay Area seems pretty secure right now. But all in all, I just want to say that this has been a really interesting experience. It truly indicates that we can deal with some of the phenomena, well, not the phenomena, but more the impact of the phenomena on our clients, on the people who are experiencing this from a virtual perspective. I think the world has kind of grown quite a bit more in accepting virtual communication. As much as we might get fatigued by it, we really have an indicator that given the right team, and I think this is a key element, that a team approach seems to be best, especially having a mental health professional involved in that team if that is one of the issues, which it certainly was in this case. But having that right team of people can really help you handle the case virtually and can lead to some form of resolution and help for the families involved. Now, there are some types of cases that this is going to be very difficult to deal with, except from a therapeutic perspective. We don't know how much of the phenomena might have been psychokinesis because we could not observe the situation as it was happening, but we were able to work through the major issues for the family, and that was the point of this exercise. Now, we're willing to take questions. We're all four of us here, so please hit us with your questions and let's have a nice discussion. Thanks very much.